The deafening silence of the battlefield was broken only by the sound of ragged breathing, the labored, shallow breaths of Sergeant James Carter, a man who had fought through countless battles but now lay motionless in the dirt. His uniform, once crisp and proud, was now soaked with blood and dirt, clinging to his body like a second skin. His vision blurred, the edges of reality slipping away as he struggled to remain conscious. The chaos of war had left him battered, but it was the weight of exhaustion that now threatened to take him. Beside him, his loyal canine partner, Rex, stood guard, his sharp eyes scanning the empty landscape. The German shepherd's instincts were on high alert. Rex could feel it. His handler, the man who had saved countless lives on the battlefield, was fading fast. The bond between them was unspoken but undeniable, a connection forged in the fires of war. Rex whined softly, nudging James's limp body with his nose, desperate for a response. The battlefield, once alive with gunfire and shouts, now felt like a vast, desolate wasteland. James's heartbeat was weak, barely registering in the stillness. With every passing moment, his strength ebbed away, and Rex, sensing the urgency, refused to give in to the silence. James's hand, once steady in the face of death, now trembled, unable to grip the rifle that lay just out of reach. His body was shutting down, and it seemed as though the darkness was creeping in, ready to claim him. But Rex wasn't ready to lose his partner. Not like this, not while there was still hope. The battlefield had turned cold, its unyielding landscape offering no mercy. But in the midst of it, there was one thing James could still feel: the warmth of Rex's body pressing close, a reminder that he wasn't alone. As Rex stood over him, eyes filled with urgency, something stirred within the sergeant. It wasn't just the dog's unwavering loyalty, it was the instinct to survive, to fight until the very end, no matter the odds. Rex's growl cut through the air, low and determined. The German shepherd circled James, his mind racing, his body a well-oiled machine, trained for moments like this. There was no time to wait. The enemy could return at any moment. The mission was far from over, and without help, James wouldn't make it. Then Rex saw it. The radio. James's communication device was still attached to his vest, just within reach. Rex's sharp jaws clamped down on the strap, and with a powerful yank he pulled it free. The device landed just within reach of James's hand, and the dog let out a sharp bark, his voice slicing through the heavy silence like a beacon. James stirred. The radio in his hand felt cold, unfamiliar, but Rex's presence was the anchor he needed. With the last ounce of strength he could muster, James pressed the button on the radio, his voice barely a whisper. "This is Carter. Need assistance. Location unknown." A long silence followed. Then a voice crackled through the speaker. "Sergeant Carter, do you copy?" The words were like a lifeline thrown into the void, but even as hope surged through James's fading body, the strain was too much. His fingers lost their grip, and the radio slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground. Rex's ears perked up as he watched his handler grow weaker by the second. The German shepherd's panic was palpable. He had done everything in his power, but it wasn't enough. The radio had failed. The team was still miles away. Rex's instincts screamed at him. Find them. He had to act. And he had to act fast. Without a second thought, Rex darted off into the barren landscape, his paws pounding against the earth. His eyes scanned the horizon, seeking any sign of life. The landscape stretched out before him, empty, unforgiving, but Rex's mind was fixed on one thing: getting help. He couldn't do it alone. He had to find the soldiers. He had to save James. Minutes passed, the wind rushing past his ears, his heart racing in sync with his paws. Then, finally, a sound. Footsteps, voices, movement. Rex let out a powerful bark, his body tense, his eyes locked on the soldiers in the distance. They turned, startled by the sight of the German shepherd running toward them, his tail stiff, his body radiating urgency. "Is that Rex?" one soldier shouted, recognition flashing across his face. Rex barked again, this time turning and sprinting back the way he came, his body a blur of motion, a living signal of distress. The soldiers exchanged glances, their training kicking in. Without hesitation they followed, their boots pounding against the hard ground as they pursued Rex. The German shepherd led them like a guided missile, his eyes focused on the only goal that mattered: James. He didn't need words. His mission was clear. His handler was in trouble, and he would get them there in time. As the soldiers crested a ridge, they saw James, motionless on the ground, barely holding on. The sight of him was enough to freeze the blood in their veins. But they knew. If Rex had been even a minute later, they would have been too late. James's eyes fluttered open for just a brief moment, his gaze meeting Rex's. A faint, exhausted smile crossed his lips as he whispered, barely audible, "You did good, buddy. But this battle wasn't over yet." The air was thick with tension as the soldiers rushed toward James. Their boots pounded against the uneven terrain, the harsh sound mingling with the frantic beats of their hearts. Every second felt like a battle, in itself, as though the very earth beneath their feet was fighting against them. They had to move faster. Time was running out. Rex was still by James's side, his amber eyes fixed on the soldiers. The K-9 knew the urgency of the situation, and although he couldn't speak, his presence said everything. His body was rigid, his posture alert, watching the soldiers as they worked to stabilize the sergeant. His instincts screamed at him. Protect, keep watch. Don't let anything happen to him now. One of the medics dropped to his knees beside James, quickly assessing the situation. His hands moved swiftly, checking vital signs, his face darkening as he realized just how close they were to losing the sergeant. "He's fading," the medic muttered under his breath, pressing his fingers to James's neck, trying to feel for a pulse. "We need to move him now. He won't make it much longer out here." Rex's eyes never left James. His body trembled with anxiety. He had been through countless training scenarios, but this was real. This was his handler, his partner, his heart raced as he sensed the panic in the air. The soldiers were trying their best, but there was no time to waste. With a quick glance at the group, the medic barked orders. "We need to get him out of here. We can't wait for the evac team. We move him now." The soldiers acted without hesitation, their movements swift and practiced. 2 men crouched down beside James, preparing to lift him onto a makeshift stretcher. But the moment they tried to lift him, a sharp gasp escaped James's lips. Even unconscious, his body couldn't bear the strain of being moved. His condition was too fragile. Rex let out a low, mournful whimper. His body was vibrating with a sense of urgency he couldn't ignore. He wasn't just a dog, he was family, and his family was in danger. He scanned the battlefield once more, his sharp eyes taking in the scattered gear left behind in the chaos. His gaze landed on a fallen backpack, and something clicked in his mind. His training kicked in. He had seen the soldiers improvise before. They had made stretchers out of anything they could find. The question now was, could he help them do it? Without wasting a moment, Rex sprinted toward the backpack, his paws kicking up dirt as he snatched it up in his teeth. The soldiers watched in disbelief as he dragged the heavy bag toward them, his body low to the ground, his muscles rippling with determination. One of the soldiers raised an eyebrow, his expression a mixture of surprise and confusion. "What is he doing?" he asked. Before anyone could answer, another soldier's eyes widened in realization. "Wait, I think he wants us to use the pack. As a stretcher." The soldiers exchanged glances, and in that instant, they understood. Rex had seen them use makeshift stretchers before. He had been trained to observe, to adapt. This wasn't just a dog. This was a soldier in his own right. Quickly, they moved into action. One soldier grabbed a long rifle and began tying it to another, creating a rudimentary frame. They stretched fabric from the backpack across, forming a makeshift stretcher that would hopefully support James's fragile body. Rex stood back, his body taut with anticipation. The moment James was secured, the K-9 sprang into motion. He didn't wait for any orders. He was on a mission, and nothing would stop him. His instincts were razor-sharp. He matched the soldiers' pace, keeping them, moving forward, leading the way with unflinching resolve. The terrain was rough, filled with uneven patches and loose soil. Every step was a battle in itself, but the team pushed forward, sweat dripping down their faces despite the cool air. Rex's eyes were constantly scanning the path ahead, his, every movement in perfect sync with the mission. He couldn't afford to slow down. He wouldn't let them fail now. Minutes passed. Every second felt like an eternity as they moved through the desolate landscape. The soldiers' breath came in ragged gasps, their muscles burning from the exertion. But still, Rex led the way, his determination unshaken. Then, finally, a distant sound broke the monotony, the hum of an approaching helicopter. Rex's ears perked up, his head swiveling toward the sky. His eyes locked onto the aircraft as it drew closer. The soldiers waved frantically, signaling their position. The medic kept his focus on James, continuously monitoring his condition, his hands never leaving the sergeant's chest. "We're almost there, Carter," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Just hold on." The helicopter descended, its powerful blades cutting through the still air. As it touched down, the soldiers wasted no time. They rushed forward, moving. James onto the waiting transport with precision. The medic climbed aboard after him, shouting orders for the pilot to take off immediately. As the helicopter lifted into the air, Rex stood below, his amber eyes locked onto the retreating aircraft. The weight in his chest began to ease, though his heart remained heavy with the knowledge that the battle was far from over. James was safe, for now. But Rex didn't move. He stayed where he was, watching the helicopter until it disappeared into the horizon. For the first time in his life, the man who had been his protector, his partner, was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the silence of a world that had shifted, a world where he no longer had to guard the front lines, where his duty was done. The soldiers who remained on the ground stood still beside him, their faces grim as they watched the chopper fade from view. One of them knelt down beside Rex, resting a hand gently on the dog's head. "You did good, buddy," the soldier said softly, his voice filled with admiration. But Rex barely moved. His eyes were distant, as though he were waiting for something that would never come. He had completed his mission, but in his heart, he knew that the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The days that followed were long and uncertain. For Rex, each hour felt like a lifetime. He was transported back to the military base, but even the familiar surroundings did little to ease the gnawing feeling in his chest. The battlefield was behind him, and yet it felt like part of him was still there, still fighting, still watching over James. The base was busy with soldiers coming and going, training and preparing for new assignments. But Rex wasn't concerned with any of that. He hadn't been told much, but he could feel the absence of his handler like a heavy weight pressing down on him. James was gone, and Rex didn't understand why he wasn't there to protect him anymore. He spent the first few days pacing restlessly. In the kennel, his body tense, his eyes constantly scanning the perimeter. The familiar sounds of the base, the echoes of boots on pavement, the hum of military trucks, the chatter of other soldiers, felt distant, foreign. Rex's sharp ears flicked toward every approaching sound, and each time his heart leapt in anticipation. He was waiting for James to return. He was used to the chaos of battle, the noise of helicopters, gunfire, and explosions, but this was different. It was quieter, and the silence was unbearable. He refused to eat at first, unable to focus on anything except the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Every time a soldier passed by his kennel, he would sit up, his amber eyes searching their faces for any hint of news about James. He waited for someone to tell him what had happened, whether his handler was okay, if he was coming back, or if he was gone for good. The days blurred into each other. Rex's once steady demeanor was replaced by a constant, restless energy. He knew something was missing. His world had been built around James. They had shared countless moments in battle, moments of trust and connection that transcended words. James wasn't just a soldier to him, he was family, and family didn't just disappear. Then, one day, the commander entered the kennel area. Rex's ears pricked up as he heard the familiar footsteps. The other soldiers fell silent as the commander approached, his face unreadable, his expression heavy. Rex instinctively rose to his feet, his body taut with attention. The commander stopped in front of Rex's enclosure, his eyes locking with the German shepherd's. Rex's sharp, intelligent gaze never wavered. It was as though the two shared a silent understanding, an unspoken bond that went beyond the rank and the duty. The commander knelt down, meeting Rex at eye level. His voice was quiet, almost reverent as he spoke. "James is stable now, Rex. He made it." Rex's heart seemed to skip a beat. The words didn't make sense at first. He didn't understand all of them, but he knew one thing. James was alive. The moment those words left the commander's lips, a surge of relief washed over Rex. His body relaxed, the tension lifting for the first time in days. The commander exhaled, his eyes softening as he continued. "He's asking for you. He wants to see you." The commander's words pierced through the haze of uncertainty that had surrounded Rex for so long. His body tensed again, this time not with anxiety but with anticipation. James was alive, and now he was asking for him. Without hesitation, Rex began to move. His instincts kicked in. He didn't need to be told what to do. He had waited long enough. As the soldiers opened the kennel door, Rex bolted forward, his body sleek and powerful as he raced toward the waiting transport. His heart pounded in his chest and his paws drummed the pavement in a rhythm that was all too familiar. He wasn't just walking, he was on a mission. The journey to the medical facility felt like an eternity. Every turn, every stop seemed to stretch out in slow motion. Rex's excitement only grew as they neared the hospital. The scent of antiseptic and the faint hum of machines filled the air, and Rex's ears flicked with every sound. But nothing compared to the feeling of finally being reunited with his handler. The moment they arrived, Rex was out of the vehicle before anyone could stop him. He didn't need to be told where to go. His nose led him, his body instinctively, turning toward the building where he knew James was. The soldiers who had accompanied him barely had time to react as Rex darted through the doors, his muscles propelling him forward. Inside the hospital, the sterile air was thick with the buzz of machines. The soft beeping of monitors, the quiet shuffle of nurses, and the distant murmur of voices were the only sounds that filled the room. At the center of it all, lying on the bed, was James. He was pale, his face gaunt, his body weak, but his eyes were alive. Rex stopped at the door, his gaze locking onto James. For a moment it felt like the world had paused. Time stood still. James's eyes fluttered open at the sound of footsteps, and when he saw Rex standing there, his loyal companion, the one who had never left his side, the weak smile that appeared on his face was all the confirmation Rex needed. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The bond between them was undeniable. Rex let out a soft whimper, his body lowering slightly as he stepped forward, his movements slow but deliberate. He pressed his head gently against James's hand, offering comfort in the only way he knew. How? James let out a shaky breath, his fingers slowly moving through Rex's fur. He smiled, though it was weak and tired. "You never gave up on me, did you?" he whispered. Rex let out a soft huff, nuzzling closer to his handler, the one person he had fought to protect, the one person he would never leave behind. James's fingers tightened around his fur as if to reassure himself that Rex was really there. "They told me you saved my life," James continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Rex stayed by his side, refusing to leave. He was there, not just as a soldier, but as a friend, family. As the nurses came in to check James's vitals, Rex remained calm but alert, his eyes watching everything, his instincts never dulled. He was still on guard. He had saved James once, and now he would stay by his side, keeping watch over him as he healed. Time moved slowly in the hospital room. Each day, James grew stronger, but it was a fragile strength. His body had been broken, but his spirit, his will to survive, remained unyielding. His recovery was a slow process, but it was happening. And through it all, Rex never left his side. The bond between them had deepened in ways that words couldn't capture. James knew that Rex wasn't just a service dog, he was his guardian, his protector, his partner in every sense of the word. The German Shepherd had given everything for him, endured the battlefield, fought through the pain, and refused to give up. James, in turn, had made a silent promise. No matter what happened, he would never leave Rex behind. Yet, despite the quiet comfort that surrounded them, there was still one looming question. The future. What would happen now? James knew that his injuries were serious enough that he wouldn't be returning to combat anytime soon. The doctors had made that clear. And while his team had already begun to plan the next phase of operations, a cold reality loomed over them. Rex, too, was a soldier in active duty. Military protocol was strict. Service dogs had a clear role in the battlefield, but once their handlers were no longer fit for duty, the question of what happened to the K9s was equally clear. They would be reassigned. James didn't know how he could accept that. The thought of losing Rex, the dog who had saved his life, the dog who had been by his side through the darkest moments, was impossible to bear. He had seen soldiers come and go, but the bond between a soldier and his K9 partner was unique. It was built on trust, loyalty, and shared sacrifice. No one understood that bond like James did. Rex was family. The military didn't see it that way, though. As much as James wanted to fight for his partner, there was an order, a protocol, and that meant Rex might have to leave him. The thought haunted James during the quiet moments, and the fear was growing louder. What if he was forced to say goodbye to Rex? Days passed, and the tension in the room built up. James knew that the decision would come soon. The inevitable conversation was approaching, and when it came, it would change everything. The commander came to visit one afternoon, his face grim as he entered the room. Rex had been lying at the foot of the bed, his watchful eyes following the movement of every person who entered. But when the commander stepped through the door, Rex's posture stiffened. He knew this wasn't a social call. The commander's voice was soft, but the weight of his words hung in the air. "James, we need to talk about Rex." James's heart skipped a beat. He had been bracing for this moment, but now that it was here, the reality was more crushing than he had imagined. "What about him?" James asked, his voice hoarse, almost defensive. His hand instinctively moved to rest on Rex's back, as if to reassure the dog and himself at the same time. The commander's expression softened slightly. "You know the rules, James. Rex is still active duty. He's one of the best K9s we have. But with your injuries, we have to follow protocol. You're not returning to combat. And Rex—" The commander paused, choosing his words carefully. "He'll be reassigned." A deep ache settled in James's chest. The words felt like a blow to his heart. He knew the military's regulations, but they seemed so cold now, so detached. How could they just pull Rex away from him after everything they had been through? How could they separate them after all the battles, the sacrifices, and the bond they shared? James swallowed hard, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through his body. His voice was firm, but it cracked with emotion. "He saved my life," James said, his gaze never leaving the commander's. "He's not just a soldier. He's my partner." The commander's eyes softened in understanding, but he didn't relent. "I know, James. I know. But this is the way it has to be. Rex has a job to do, and you—" He trailed off, glancing at Rex, who was now sitting beside James, his eyes full of quiet understanding. "You'll heal, and when you're ready, you'll have to move on. This is how it works." James felt the sting of those words deep in his soul. Move on? How could he move on from Rex? The dog who had been by his side through every mission, every challenge, every near-death moment. They had saved each other, kept each other alive. How could the military possibly expect him to let that go? There was a long silence between them. The commander's face was unreadable, but James saw the conflict in his eyes. This wasn't easy for him either, but it was clear he had a job to do, and the decision had already been made. James sat up, straighter despite the sharp pain in his chest. He wasn't going to let Rex go without a fight. "He stays with me," James said, his voice unwavering. "I don't care what the rules are. He saved my life. He's not just another soldier. He's my family." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The commander didn't speak right away, his gaze shifting between James and Rex. Rex had remained calm throughout the conversation, his eyes never leaving his handler. It was as if he knew this moment was important, even if he didn't fully understand the words. But he understood the emotion, the bond between them. Finally, the commander sighed, rubbing his hand over his face. "I understand how you feel, James. I do. But the rules are the rules." He paused again, glancing at Rex, who had quietly sat down at James's side. "But I'll see what I can do." James didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in days, he allowed himself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance that he and Rex wouldn't be torn apart. Maybe the rules could bend for them, for the bond they shared. The commander stood up, giving one last look at James and Rex before he left the room. "I'll let you know as soon as I hear anything." James turned to Rex, his heart heavy with uncertainty. But Rex, loyal as always, pressed his head into James's hand, offering silent comfort. James's fingers moved through Rex's fur, the familiar sensation grounding him. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. The days after the commander's visit felt like a lifetime. James lay in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts consumed with one thing. Rex. Every moment was a quiet battle within himself. He knew the military's protocol. He knew the rules. But none of that mattered to him anymore. Rex was his partner, his family. How could he possibly live without him? Each day, Rex stayed at his side, never straying far. The bond between them only deepened, a silent understanding passing between them that no one else could ever truly grasp. The German Shepherd had done so much more than just protect him in battle. He had saved his life, time and time again, and now James couldn't imagine life without him. James had fought in wars, faced death more times than he could count, and survived against all odds. But this fight, this was different. This wasn't a battle fought on foreign soil with weapons in hand. It was a battle of hearts, a battle for a friendship that transcended duty and training. Every time the door to his room opened, he wondered if this was the moment when he'd be told that Rex had been reassigned, that the decision had been made, and they would have to part ways. He couldn't bear the thought of it. But there was still no word, and the waiting game stretched on. One afternoon, nearly a week after the commander's visit, there was a soft knock on the door. James sat up in his bed, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. He knew it had to be the decision he'd been waiting for. Either they would be separated, or they would be allowed to stay together. The door creaked open slowly, and there stood the commander, his face unreadable. For a brief moment, everything stood still. Rex, who had been lying at the foot of the bed, instantly sat up, his eyes locking on the commander. James's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know what to expect. The commander stepped inside, looking down at the German shepherd who remained perfectly still, his ears perked and his gaze unwavering. Then, without a word, the commander turned to James. "I've spoken to the board," he began, his voice steady but serious. James's heart raced in his chest. The moment had come. James sat forward, his hand instinctively resting on Rex's head. He could feel the tension in the air, could sense that this was the final moment. The decision had been made. The commander paused, looking from James to Rex. "I've made some calls," he said. "I've explained the situation. I've told them about what Rex did, about the bond you two share, and they've agreed to make an exception." James blinked, unable to process the words at first. He leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat. What are you saying?" The commander smiled softly, a rare expression. "Rex is officially retired from active duty." James's heart stopped for a moment. The weight of the words hit him all at once. Retired. Rex wouldn't be reassigned. He wouldn't be taken from him. Rex was his, for good. "Rex is yours, Sergeant Carter," the commander said, his voice softer now. "You've earned it. You've both earned it." James blinked again, feeling a surge of emotion flooding through him. He had fought in battles, faced death, and lived through unimaginable hardships. But this moment, was the one that made everything worth it. It wasn't the medals, the honors, or the victories that mattered. It was this. Rex was coming home with him. James didn't know what to say. His throat tightened, and for a moment he just stared at the commander, unable to find the words. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But as he looked down at Rex, who was now wagging his tail with excitement, it finally hit him. They were going home together. "You hear that, buddy?" James said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked down at Rex, who was now standing up and wagging his tail with fervor. "You're coming home. We're a team. Always." Rex let out a happy bark, his body vibrating with excitement. He jumped up onto the bed, pressing his head into James's chest, as if to confirm that this was real, that they weren't going to be separated. The commander, watching the scene with a quiet smile, gave a nod. "You two deserve each other," he said. "I'll make sure the paperwork is finalized. You're free to go once you're able." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving James and Rex alone. The silence that followed was full of relief. James exhaled a deep breath. He didn't even know he had been holding. He ran his fingers through Rex's fur, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. They had done it. They had fought for each other. And now they would finally be able to leave the battlefield behind. Together. The weeks that followed were a blur. James's recovery continued, but with Rex by his side, the process felt a little less daunting. The bond between them was stronger than ever, and with each passing day, James felt a little more like himself again. He knew he still had a long road ahead, but he didn't have to walk it alone. When the time came for James to leave the hospital, it wasn't just his own steps he was focused on. It was Rex's as well. The dog who had given everything for him would now be by his side for the rest of their lives. They would go home together, no more battles, no more missions, just the quiet peace of a life beyond the chaos of war. As James walked out of the hospital, his legs still weak, Rex trotted beside him, his tail wagging in a steady rhythm. They made their way to a small house on the outskirts of town, James's new home, a place of peace and quiet where he could finally begin to heal. The world outside had been loud, chaotic, and full of violence, but here it was different. Here It was just the two of them. Rex quickly adapted to civilian life, although his protective instincts never faded. If James stayed in bed too long, Rex would nudge him awake. If James had a restless night, Rex stayed close, offering silent comfort. And when James took too long to get up or do something, Rex was always there to remind him that life was moving on. Together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, James sat on the porch of his new home, watching Rex play in the yard. It was hard to believe that they were here, in this quiet, peaceful place. There had been so many moments on the battlefield when James thought he wouldn't make it out alive, and yet here he was, with Rex by his side, finally able to breathe. "You saved me, buddy," James said softly, his voice full of emotion. Rex ran up to him, pressing his head into James's hand. More than once. Rex let out a soft sigh as if to say, "I know." And in that moment, James realized just how deep their bond ran. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were family. And nothing, not even the harshest of battles, could break that bond. They had fought together, survived together, and now they were here, in this new chapter of their lives. It wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something even more meaningful, a life where the greatest battles would no longer be fought with weapons, but with loyalty, love, and heart. James smiled, his eyes bright with hope. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together, Rex. Always."